Now, my friend Preston Gillum, he's kind of helped me see that there's some parallels that we can draw between how spiritual warfare is happening and how typical warfare or warfare that we experience in this world happens, that is going to function in a similar way. So let's kind of compare that, because there's a number of different ways that war may take place. So the first one is this overt war. That's where two nations go up against each other, or multiple nations fight each other. And so this would be examples of World War I or World War II or the Korean War or Vietnam War and so forth, right? Where two groups are very clearly in battle with one another. And that's happening in a spiritual realm as well, where there is an overt war between the armies of God and the armies of Satan, where the demons and the angels are fighting each other. We see that in the book of Daniel, where an angel, a messenger of God, was prohibited from talking with Daniel because he was battling with another demon, with another fallen angel. And so there's that sort of thing. We see how Moses and I think it was Gabriel, or maybe it was Michael and Satan were fighting over Moses' body. And so there's these battles, these fights that go on within the spiritual realm. And so there's an overt war. There's a guerrilla warfare. And so guerrilla warfare is where one army is much smaller, but they're not organized. And that's what makes it difficult. They're not all showing up in their uniforms and operating in a very clear strategic way, or even fighting by rules. Instead, they blend into the surroundings, they blend into the crowd, and they pop up. And maybe that's with terrorist activities and so forth. And so ISIS might be an example of something like that. And that's happening in the spiritual realm as well, where there isn't a necessarily identifiable army, where the demon doesn't show up wearing the uniform and the colors of the enemy. Instead, he just pops up, and it's seemingly out of the blue, we might experience these demonic attacks. Or the flesh, out of the blue, may suddenly bombard your mind with all kinds of evil thoughts or shameful thoughts and so forth, and then disappeared almost as quickly as they came. And so there's that nature of guerrilla warfare that we see in the spiritual realm. However, those would be more overt forms, where you see them happening. I think the more deadly or more dangerous ones are the ones that are covert. And I say they're dangerous or more deadly because we don't often recognize them as for what they are, for the attacks that they are. And I think that's especially the case within Western civilization when it comes to the spiritual warfare, is that the devil and his enemy, they don't present themselves in a very obvious way. They're trying to fly under the radar. And so one example of that would be state-level warfare. And what I mean by state-level warfare, this is the stuff that's going on with spies and espionage, right? So think about all those great movies we love to watch during the Cold War, right? Where the CIA is battling the KGB and going back and forth and so forth. And what they're doing here is they're either trying to sabotage infrastructure, they're stealing plans, they're trying to send false information, trying to confuse the enemy. All that's happening on a state level. And the same is true in a spiritual way, where our enemy is going to be, in a very covert way, attacking God's infrastructure, and that's the church. And really to attack the church, to undermine our role, to undermine our message, to discredit us in some way, to spread false information about who God is, about who we are, about who the church is and what we're called to be, or even who other people are. Who those neighbors are, and the people in the world, or the people who we don't necessarily agree with. And he's spreading all this false information to turn us against those people. Another big one is propaganda. And propaganda is a huge way to fight a war. And so this would be the media, and how the media might be used, particularly in where the media is state-run, like we see in China or what was in the USSR, and how the media would be used to promote, to propagate the government messages and branding. North Korea still does this, for example. But during the Cold War, we would see this, and it wasn't just necessarily the media. They would have, key people, and the communists they recognized they had these people what they call useful idiots. Isn't that a great term? And these people weren't necessarily, on the payroll or being directed by the USSR, but what they were doing is they were defending the USSR to America, to Canada. And so they would often be, in positions of some kind of power or university or professors, and they would be promoting all the benefits of communism and so forth, but they were acting on their behalf, and they were spreading that message of propaganda. And again, that's a big one that's happening within the church, within Christianity, where this propaganda is coming from our enemy, and it causes us to doubt the cause, to doubt who we are and the value we play in this world. And so, for example, this message that we hear, Christians are all hypocrites, that churches only want your money, that they say one thing and act differently, and so forth. Or messages to create division. Our church is better and we do it right, and they believe wrong things, and they're sub-level and they're not important enough. Or just the whole idea of mistrusting leaders within the churches, and mistrusting authority in general. And so all of that propaganda that's being spread by our enemy is simply meant to weaken us, to cause us to doubt, to question, to pull back. When the reality is, as Jesus says, because he is the light and that light is in us, we become the light to the world. And so why would you hide this light? And yet that's what this propaganda does. It either discredits us or it causes us to pull back. And so we're afraid to share the gospel. We're afraid to evangelize. And yet we've got the answer in the person of Jesus Christ. And we're afraid to share that with our friends and our loved ones and our neighbors.